In 279 BC, the Romans developed a new and extraordinary weapon with one aim in mind: to defeat elephants. And it is about that weapon that I shall be talking in this video, which has been sponsored by no one, which is a bit of a shame because I have a mortgage to pay. Anyway, in order to tell this story, I have to tell you a few other things first. So bear with me. The first thing is, well, about a chap called Pyrrhus. Now, if you're the sort of person who watches this sort of video, you probably know what a Pyrrhic victory is, and you perhaps know that it's named after Pyrrhus, an ancient Greek general. He was from Epirus, well, specifically he's from Molossia, actually, but that was part of Epirus, and he had one hell of a reputation as a great war leader, and what an amazing CV this chap had. He wouldn't have had a passport because they didn't use them in those days, but if he had had a passport and he needed to write down his occupation, he could have written something like itinerant king. Now, you may think that itineracy and kingshiphoodom are mutually exclusive ideas, but no, it seems that in the ancient world at that time there was an ecological niche for someone to wander over the world saying, "King for hire, anybody need a king? Get your king here. Lovely king. Anyone need a king?" And more times than you perhaps would expect, someone said, "Oh, hey, do you know what? Actually, we could do with a king. Could you? Oh, brilliant. We've got a king." Now, the main reason he kept becoming king of places, he was king of, Molossia and Pyrrhus twice, and then later Macedonia, and arguably Syracuse, and then Sicily. The reason he kept becoming king here, hither and yon, was because he had this amazing reputation as a war leader. He really knew what he was doing. He could galvanize men. He knew how many spears he needed to take, and he knew about logistics, and he could, in the field, on the day, he kept his head, and he was good at his job. He first became king when he was 11. And granted, this was because he was of royal blood, but he didn't take the traditional route of being the son of the previous king. Oh no, there was one hell of a civil war going on, loads of noble families betraying each other, killing each other, and two of them just said, "Right, you're king now, okay? Now just do as it. You're only 11, just do as you say, and as we say, and just, he's king. If you're going to hurl any stones, hurl them at him." And it was, in at the deep end, but he really proved himself. Although he got ousted and went into exile for a bit, but that didn't go too badly. He ended up marrying the daughter of his host in exile, the daughter of Ptolemy. Yes, that Ptolemy of Egypt. And, have you ever married a princess? I mean, some of you perhaps have, but I suspect very few of you. If you were to marry a princess, I'd say, well done, sir. I mean, that's doing pretty well. Very few, I haven't married a princess ever. Very few men ever get to marry a princess. Well, he didn't just marry a princess. Oh no. He married 2, 3, 4, 5 women, everyone a princess. Amazing. 5 wives he had, every one a princess. I don't know if that's ever been equalled in the whole of history. Okay, granted, the first one died within a year, possibly of childbirth, we don't know, and another one betrayed him and joined the other side. But, I dare say he saw the upside, but it freed him up to marry more princesses. So he was pretty good at marrying into royal families, so that's one way to become a king. But mainly it was because he was a very good general. According to Plutarch, Hannibal reckoned that he was the greatest general of all time. Although, according to Plutarch, yes, the same Plutarch, Hannibal, in another conversation with Scipio, said that Alexander the Great was the greatest of all time, and then Pyrrhus, and then, modesty, me, Hannibal. Number 3, much to the annoyance, I guess, of Scipio, who's hoping that it would be him. Now, Pyrrhus got a reputation, but then he sort of lost it. He got a Pyrrhic victory too many. You see, he did a bit of a Hannibal, actually, in that he invaded Italy, tried to ally all the various subjugated states subjugated by Rome, tried to get them to join him against Rome and free them all from the Roman yoke, and get a bit of booty and reputation and honour and glory and all those things while he was at it, true. And he brought over elephants. We don't know for certain what kind of elephants he brought over, but probably Indian. This is what is generally thought. And some of the mahouts, some of the trainers, and possibly the men who actually rode them into battle may have been all the way from India. Anyway, When he was invited by the Tarentines from what is today Taranto, was at the time Tarentum, this is a Spartan Greek colony in southern Italy, part of Magna Graecia, he thought, right, great, I'm up for this, let's do it. And he went across the sea with a core force, an army of, we don't know how many, but tens of thousands from Pyrrhus. And then he joined up with loads of allies in Italy, and he fought his way around Italy, and he fought a big battle, Heraclea, and that was in 280 BC. And yeah, he sort of won, but at a very heavy cost. A lot of his best troops, his troops that had crossed over with him from his homeland, they got hammered. He lost very high casualties, and very high casualties amongst officers as well. His officers, who were part of the glue holding the whole army together. And he's thinking, oh, okay, well, that we won, I suppose, but too many of victories like that, and we are ruined. You see, if his little core of the army shrank and shrank, then his various allies would start to perhaps have less and less confidence in him, and his allies could melt away very quickly, and so his army could suddenly become very small and very vulnerable, and it would still be in Italy, and the Rome was still very strong. He, like Hannibal, didn't just invade Italy and, as I say, try to ally the other states and use elephants. He also went to Rome and then didn't take it, just like Hannibal, looked at it and thought, ooh, that's a bit tough looking. Look at the walls. Okay, I'll withdraw and rethink my plan. So Pyrrhus had fought his first victory, and that was the very first time that the Romans ever had to fight against elephants. And it really shook them. The elephants were really big, and what the hell do you do against them? And they knew that they were going to have to fight this chap again, and they'd better have something better up their sleeves than just panicking and hoping for the best. Now, we have three main accounts of the Battle of Asculum, and these are from Plutarch, Cassius Dio, and Dionysius of Halicarnassus. None of these is great, not least because they were written an awfully long time after the event. Dionysius of Halicarnassus, he's closest to the event, writing only 2.5 centuries later. Yeah, I mean, he had other sources written before him to work from, but even so, that's a long time out of living memory, so things are clearly going to be lost and changed through a sort of process of Chinese whispers over the years, stories handed down by the generations until eventually someone wrote it down and then someone else rewrote it but changed it. And by the time it got to him, how do we know how accurate it was? Plutarch was writing a little bit later again, and as for Cassius Dio, 3.5 centuries later. And they seem really to disagree quite a lot, even on who won the Battle of Asculum. Dionysius of Halicarnassus seems to have it as what you might call a draw. Plutarch a win for Pyrrhus, and Cassius Dio seems to have it as a win for the Romans. So that's a big detail who actually won the battle to disagree on. And they disagree on quite a few other things as well. Now, I don't want to read vast amounts about everything to do with the whole battle and all the run up to it and all the characters involved, but I've got snippets here that are relevant to what I'm talking about today, relevant to the elephants and what the Romans did to counter those elephants. Now, Plutarch in his parallel... By the way, if you ever want to read a bit of ancient classical history, Plutarch's Parallel Lives is a reasonably good one to start because it gives you little potted biographies of an awful lot of the important characters in Greece and Rome and over the years. But also they're quite short. Each biography is quite short, and you can read it just as a little thing on its own. You don't have to read the whole book to understand what you're working on. So if you want an ancient history book to dip in and out of, Plutarch's Parallel Lives is a pretty good one. Anyway, Volume 9, Book 21, if you want to look this up, he's talking about the Battle of Asculum. Consequently, Pyrrhus found himself obliged to fight another battle, and after recuperating his army, he marched to the city of Asculum, where he engaged the Romans. Here, however, he was forced into regions where his cavalry could not operate, and upon a river with swift current and wooded banks, so that his elephants could not charge and engage the enemy's phalanx. Strange use of the word phalanx by this translator here. The Romans weren't using phalanxes as in great big formations of spears and pikes and the like. They were using legionaries already. But I think what he means here is to engage the formed up body of the enemy's close order heavy infantry. Therefore, after many had been wounded and slain, for the time being the struggle was ended by the coming of night. But on the next day, he's the only historical writer who says it took place over 2 days. On the next day, designing to fight the battle on level ground and to bring his elephants to bear upon the ranks of the enemy, Pyrrhus occupied betimes the unfavourable parts of the field with detachments of his troops. Then he put great numbers of slingers and archers in the spaces between the elephants and led his forces to the attack in dense array and with mighty impetus. So, he's found on the first day that his elephants don't work well on bad terrain. Crossing rivers, trying to fight through forests, they don't really work. They are for charging against the masses of the enemy on open and ideally level ground. We also learn, as you'll hear soon, that elephants didn't seem to be good at attacking uphill. So, the Romans, having no opportunity for sidelong shifts and counter-movements, as on the previous day, were obliged to engage on level ground and front to front, and being anxious to repulse the enemy's men-at-arms before their elephants came up, they fought fiercely with their swords against the Macedonian spears, reckless of their lives and thinking only of wounding and slaying, while caring naught for what they suffered. While caring naught for what they suffered. Really? Okay, they fought bravely, I imagine, but larger numbers of men, why would they suddenly care naught for what they suffered? Why would they be so different from anyone else on the battlefield that day? Anyway, after a long time, however, as we are told, they began to be driven back at the point where Pyrrhus himself was pressing hard upon his opponents. But the greatest havoc was wrought by the furious strength of the elephants, since the valour of the Romans was of no avail in fighting them, but they felt that they must yield before them, as before an onrushing billow or a crashing earthquake, and not stand their ground, only to die in vain or suffer all that is most grievous without doing any good at all. 2 sentences earlier, he said they cared naught for what they suffered. So, bit of inconsistency there, I think, Plutarch. Anyway, number of significant things about this. The first I'll point out is that he definitely suggests that the elephants were very, very important. He makes them the chief concern, it seems, of the deployments of the Romans and Pyrrhus before the battle, and then at the end of the battle, it's the elephants that prove decisive. So, second point, I think it's very significant that he doesn't mention any new weapons developed by the Romans for use against the elephants at all. Well, if these elephants were the most decisive thing, and this is the first encounter, well, actually the second encounter, it's the first war in which the Romans have encountered elephants, it's the second time they fought them, you would think that if they developed some new weapon that was effective against the elephants, he'd have mentioned that. Why didn't he consider that important? Well, this calls everything into doubt. You see, we've only got the tip of the iceberg to study ancient history. And I know from my reenactment experience that you can ask someone immediately after a battle or skirmish has just been fought what just happened, and he will be wrong. So writing over 2.5 centuries later, he could be very wrong. But then the others could be wrong too. Were there in fact any new weapons used by the Romans against, well, let's see, against the elephants? Well, Cassius Dio, Volume 1, Book 10, if you're interested, writes, there was a river not easy to ford flowing between the 2 camps, and they inquired whether he chose to cross unmolested himself while they retired, or whether he would allow them to cross in order that the forces might encounter each other intact, and so, from a battle with conditions equal, the test of valour might be made an accurate one. Do you believe that? Well, it's a nice thought, isn't it? The Romans delivered this speech to overawe him, but Pyrrhus granted them permission to cross the river, since he placed great reliance upon his elephants. So again, the great emphasis on the elephants, but there are only a few elephants and tens of thousands of men in this battle. So, wow, these elephants must be flipping important. The Romans, among other preparations, made ready as a measure against the elephants iron-pointed beams mounted on wagons and bristling in all directions. From these they intended to shoot fire and various missiles in order to check the beasts. When the conflict began, the Romans forced the Greeks back, surely but slowly, until Pyrrhus, bringing his elephants to bear, not opposite their wagons, but at the other end of the line, routed their cavalry through fear of the beasts even before they had come up close. So, it seems that the Romans did come up with a new kind of weapon, some sort of war wagon, but Pyrrhus just went round them, just attacked the flanks instead, and he used his elephants against the Roman cavalry, and the horses, totally unused to these enormous, weird-looking, smelly, beast, they got spooked and they routed, and I find that very easy to believe. I mean, modern horses can be spooked by a crisp packet or, well, just about anything, frankly. So an elephant, oh yeah, if a horse is not used to elephants, that's going to spook it, no doubt. Upon their infantry, however, he inflicted no great damage. Oh, so maybe they weren't all that effective then. Meanwhile, some of the Apulians had set out against the camp of the Epirons, Epirots, it calls them here, and by so doing brought about the victory for the Romans. For when Pyrrhus sent some of his warriors against them and all the rest became disquieted and suspecting that their tents had been captured and that their companions were in flight, they gave way. Numbers of them fell. Pyrrhus and many officers besides were wounded, and later, because of the lack of food and of medical supplies, they incurred great loss. It was before this battle and in this account as well that he talks about a devotio. A devotio, this was by one Publius Decimus. Now, Publius Decimus was a Roman commander who obviously wanted to go out in a blaze of glory, or at least so the story goes, wanted to go out in a blaze of glory. And so he declared that he was going to do a devotio. He was going to enact a ritual sacrificing himself to the gods for the glory of Rome, and thus ensuring that Rome would win. And this got widely known, and the army under Pyrrhus found out about it, and some people were, oh no, he's going to ensure, he's going to do this ritual. And Pyrrhus said, okay, so tell me about this ritual then. So they wear special clothes, do they? They put red paint on their face, something like that. Yeah, I thought so. Okay, right, send the order around the whole army. If anyone is seen wearing the ritual clothing of a devotio, they're not to be killed. If they go charging in you, I will take you for the glory of Rome, and just make sure they don't die. Take them alive. And then he sent a message back saying, well, I've given all my army the orders not to kill you, just to take you alive, and so you'll have a rather ignominious downfall, and you'll definitely be captured. Because you'll be charging into my army on your own, so you're not actually going to, with your sword defeat us all. So, sorry, not a good idea. And Publius Decimus then decided that actually the Romans were probably going to beat Pyrrhus anyway, even without the ritual. So, didn't really see the need anymore. Now, later in another action, but the Samnites, being hard pressed by the Romans, caused him, that's Pyrrhus, to set forth again, and on coming to their assistance he was put to flight, for a young elephant had been wounded and, shaking off its riders, wandered about in search of its mother, whereupon the latter became excited and the other elephants grew turbulent, so that everything was thrown into dire confusion. Finally the Romans won the day, killing many men and capturing 8 elephants, and they occupied the enemy's entrenchments. Again, this shows the elephants as really decisive. They seem to make the difference between who wins, even though there are so few. We'll get to how few there may have been in a minute. And something which turns up in history again and again is that, yes, elephants, when they are really working well, can be great. But if they panic and start fleeing, they can flee very unpredictably in all sorts of directions and trample your own men. And the loss of the elephants, even if the elephants don't trample your own side, if they fail, it can really harm. You've got this wonder weapon. The elephants are going to trample them, it'll be easy. And then that doesn't happen. So we're going to have to fight this battle the hard way. That can really dent your morale. So, yeah, elephants were could be quite a liability. So, on to Dionysius of Halicarnassus. This is from book 20, if you want to look it up. The light-armed troops and the elephants he divided, this is Pyrrhus again, into two groups and placed them behind both wings at a reasonable distance in a position slightly elevated above the plain. At a reasonable distance. Okay, well, you judge what that is for yourself. Into two groups, well, presumably two equal-sized groups. The Latins, Campanians, Sabines, Umbrians, Volscians, Marrucani, Peligni, Ferentani, and their other subjects, they divided into 4 divisions and mingled them with the Roman legions in order that no part of their lines might be weak. So the Romans, they don't trust their own allies, they don't trust their loyalty, their enthusiasm to fight hard, and they also don't rate them as particularly good soldiers. And so rather than have them all together in one place, which if then attacked by the enemy could mean that they would panic, rout, and there'd be a breakthrough, they've mixed them in with their own troops throughout the whole line, making the line more homogeneous, no weak point. And dividing the cavalry, both their own and that of their allies, they placed it on both wings. That's pretty much standard. You cover your wings with the faster moving cavalry. Outside the line, they stationed the light armed troops and the wagons, 300 in number, which they'd got ready for the battle against the elephants. These wagons had upright beams on which were mounted movable transverse poles that could be swung around as quick as thought in any direction one might wish. And on the ends of the poles, there were either tridents or sword-like spikes or scythes, all of iron, or again they had cranes that hurled down heavy grappling irons. Now, presumably they didn't have all of these things on all of them, but they got 300 wagons. So you have a vertical beam, and mounted on that beam somehow is something that can swing around in all directions, presumably on sort of a hinge or a chain or something. So one imagines long poles with scythes, and tridents strikes me as a little bit odd because a trident is very definitely a thrusting weapon, not a swinging weapon. So perhaps it had quite a long chain down from the beam onto quite a long trident, and you could swing it back and forwards like that to try and thrust effectively with it. But why a trident? Why not a spear? Because tridents have 3 prongs at the end, which means I suppose you're slightly more likely to hit. But if you do hit, if all 3 prongs hit, then each one hits with 1/3 the power. Better surely to have one devastating spear. But anyway, it says here tridents. So you've got some sort of swinging weapon on the top of a big vertical beam. Many of the poles had attached to them and projecting in front of the wagons fire-bearing grapnels wrapped in tow. And the tow, imagine you've made up a rope, and then the rope has rotted, and you take out the fibres. That sort of all of the fibres for perhaps bits of old rope. Perhaps the rope has needed to be replaced on a ship or something, and it's slightly rotted. It's not worth reusing the fibres to make new ropes with them. So instead, you'll just use them for something else. Use them as kindling for starting fires, and make new ropes out of fresh material. So a tow daubed with pitch, so that's something for burning, which men standing on the wagons were to set afire as soon as they came near the elephants, and then rain blows of them upon the trunks and faces of the beasts. Furthermore, standing on the wagons, which were 4-wheeled, that's quite specific. A standard wagon has 4 wheels. A cart has 2 wheels. A normal wagon has 4 wheels, but it's very specific. They had 4 wheels. These are not carts. Were many of the light-armed troops, bowmen, hurlers of stones and slingers, who threw iron caltrops, these things, nasty spikes. Now I do wonder how effective a caltrop would be on an elephant. Now, when you look at the foot of an elephant, it's a big sort of flat-bottomed thing, and so you might think, oh, that's a big surface area to shove a spike into. But actually, skeletally, they're on their tiptoes. The bones within the leg of an elephant are a bit like in a deer or a horse. So it's on its tiptoes like that, and it has a huge pad here to bulk up the foot. And if one of these got stuck in one of those pads, yes, I'm sure it would hurt and be an annoyance, but I'm not sure it would immediately lame an elephant. They're tough things, these pachyderms. But anyway, they were throwing iron caltrops, and on the ground beside the wagons there were still more men, so a lot of men. This was the battle order of the two armies that had taken the field. The forces on the king's side numbered 70,000 foot, of whom the Greeks who had crossed the Ionian Gulf amounted to 16,000. That's the core of his army. And on the Roman side, there were more than 70,000, about 20,000 of them being from Rome itself. Of horse, the Romans had about 8,000, while Pyrrhus had slightly more, as well as 19 elephants. Now, 19, that's such a specific as well as low number. When you see an ancient writer saying, oh, they had 70,000 foot, well, you know that's a big round number. It won't be exactly 70,000. 70,000, give or take, quite a few thousand perhaps. And given that other writers writing about the same battles often also use big round numbers but quite different ones. So for instance, one senator writing about this battle estimated 40,000. That's a big difference. That's a difference of 30,000 when we're thinking about 19 elephants. But the elephants were so high profile. People would have been really conscious of the elephants, and they're very countable, aren't they? You can imagine some Romans looking at the enemy. Wow, there are a lot of them. How many do you think? 40,000? Or you think 50,000? I'd say 40,000. Okay, write that down. And someone just splits the difference, 45,000. But, oh look, elephants, those grey mounds rising above the mass of the men. I can see over there, 4, 5, there's 10 there, and there's 8, is it? Oh no, it's 9. Can you see that where the banner is? There are 2. Yeah, it's facing the wrong way. I don't know why, but yeah, that's 9. Okay, that's 19. So 19, they're very countable things, elephants, and it's a number that would have been told to other people. Oh, they had 19 elephants. Because it's so specific, and because common sense tells us that because they were so important and they're so easy to count, that becomes a reliable figure. 19, okay, they had 19, but I think we should be a little bit more cautious than just to leave it there, because if I think that 19 sounds like a very reliable figure because it's so specific and so low and elephants are so countable, surely someone writing a hell of a long time ago, but still 2.5 to 3.5 centuries, in this case 3.5 centuries after the event, he might conclude the same. He might think, oh, 19, hey, that's so specific, so countable. Yeah, I'm going to rely on that. I'm going to write that. I'm going to repeat 19. And all the historians, having heard this number 19, where did it come from? Supposedly there were 20 at the previous battle and one got wounded. So well, that's another reason to think. But then was 20 accurate? And did the one that got wounded actually die? 19 is so believable that it's so easy to imagine people repeating it because it's so believable, even if it were wrong. But anyway, we have no other evidence to go on, so let us imagine 19 elephants. That's not very many. 300 wagons, and each with how many men on? They were being drawn by oxen, 2 you would have thought at a minimum, maybe 4. And you'd need a man or 2 to drive the oxen and steer the thing. And then you've got men operating those big swingy things, the cranes and the fires. You need a few there. And then there are all the men shooting arrows and with slings and throwing caltrops and so forth, according to this. So you can imagine it's got to be at least 6 per wagon, right? What does he mean by there were many men in the wagons? Because if there were 1 man in each wagon, that would be 300 men, which is many men. But that doesn't feel right, does it? Surely you wouldn't say there were many men in the wagons if you meant 1 per wagon. No, you mean that there were several men in each wagon. So if there were 6 men in each wagon, there were 300 wagons, that's 1,800 men. And that's before you've added in all the escorting troops, as well as all the animals, beasts of burden to pull these things. So it's thousands of men to deal with 19 elephants. It does seem a bit overkill, doesn't it? Anyway, let's carry on. So he then describes how the battle involves the cavalry whirling about a lot, and how the Macedonians do very well against the Romans, but unfortunately the Epirans, I think it's Epirans, did badly. Anyway, when the king had ordered the elephants to be led up to the part of the line that was in difficulties, the Romans, mounted on the pole-bearing wagons, upon learning of the approach of the beasts, drove to meet them. At first they checked the onrush of the beasts, beasts, smiting them with their engines and turning the fire-bearing grapnels into their eyes. Then, when the men stationed in their towers no longer drove the beast forward, but hurled their spears down from above, and the light-armed troops cut through the wattled screen surrounding the wagons and hamstrung the oxen, the men at the machines, leaping down from their cars, fled for refuge to the nearest infantry and caused great confusion among them. Well, quite a few interesting details there. So there are wicker shields that the cattle are behind, protecting them. Okay, so that's an interesting detail. And that the men in the towers on the elephants were thrusting down into them. So you imagine these carts are not very, very tall then, because that's one way you might deal with an elephant. You might build something really tall on the back of a wagon to equal it in height. But it seems that they haven't done that, because they're being thrust down at and having spears thrown down at them from the backs of the elephants. It also says that the men stationed in the towers no longer drove the beast forward. Now, the normal way that these ancient elephants are pictured is with a tower with a few soldiers in it, and then sitting astride the neck in front of the tower, totally unprotected and usually not even armoured, is a mahout, often an Indian guy. There he is in a turban, hello, and he's just got a stick for guiding the elephant, and he's so exposed. So exposed. You'd think, well, they wouldn't bother shooting at the elephant or the guys in the tower. They just shoot the mahout, shoot the guy steering the thing. So it does strike me as quite sensible. You know, even though he may train it, he may feed it, he may ride it to the battle, but actually once the battle is going, once you're within bowshot of the enemy, maybe the mahout gets off or gets into the tower and controls the beast from there, where he's a little bit more protected. Now, later some Roman allies turn up during the fight. They have a look at the fight and think, oh, I'm not entirely sure what's going on. We better not charge into that, because we can't really separate friend from foe there. But, oh, hey, look, there's the enemy's camp. Oh, brilliant. What a chance to get a load of loot. Oh, and do good for our allies, of course. And that, do good, because it'll distract the enemy and dampen his morale. Let's attack the camp. Pyrrhus, learning of this through the report of a cavalryman who, when the siege of the camp began, drove his horse through the enemy lines and, applying the spurs, I've seen that phrase in so many ancient translations, applying the spurs. They weren't using spurs in this period, so it's a poor choice of phrase, really. Driving his horse to maximum speed or something, not applying the spurs. Anyway, was soon at hand, decided to keep the rest of his forces in the plain and not to recall or disturb the phalanx, but sent the elephants and the boldest of the horse, carefully selected, as reinforcements for the camp. He chose the elephants against the camp. Why would he do that? Well, maybe he put high priority on relieving the camp, and he thought just the terror effect of the elephants might do it. Also, they're faster, a lot faster than ordinary infantry. Also, a lot of his infantry were engaged at this point and trying to break off and move your whole army in the face of the enemy might be extremely dangerous. So, yeah, so maybe the elephants were just a unit that he felt he could spare at the time. But if he had a really high priority use for them, smashing the centre of the enemy, you would think he would be doing that. So it seems that he didn't. Anyway, through them last bit was soon at hand, decided to give it rest. The elephants and the boldest of the horse carefully selected as reinforcements for the camp. But while these were still on the way, the camp was suddenly taken and set on fire. Those who had accompanied this feat, upon learning that the troops sent by the king were coming down from the heights against them, fled to the summit of a hill, which could not easily be ascended by either the beasts or the horses. And then later it goes on, the elephants accordingly, being unable to ascend the height, caused them no harm, nor did the squadron of horse, but the bowmen and slingers, hurling their missiles from all sides, wounded and destroyed many of them. So they couldn't have been very far away. They must have been pretty close, and yet not able to get at them by horse or elephant. Following the king's lead, the Roman consuls also recalled their troops when it was near sunset, and, taking them across the river, led them back to their camp as darkness was already coming in. The forces of Pyrrhus, having lost their tents, pack animals and slaves and all their baggage, encamped upon a height where they spent the following night under the open sky without either baggage nor attendants, and not well supplied with even the necessary food, so that many wounded men actually perished when they may have been saved had they received assistance and care. Such was the outcome of the second battle between the Romans and Pyrrhus, near the town of Asculum. So, does that sound like a victory for the Romans or Pyrrhus? Or no, that sounds roughly like a draw, doesn't it? But that time, he gives a star role to the weapon we're here to talk about, these battle wagons with their strange description. Now, the Romans had never used these before, and they are quite clearly described as being specifically for use against elephants. So they thought that it was so important that they put together 300, big round number, 300 is a lot, isn't it? That's about 16 wagons per elephant, which seems like overkill. So maybe we shouldn't believe that. But on the other hand, if these wagons were quite slow and ponderous, and it's easy to imagine that they would be, and that they had difficulty crossing rough country, and that's easy to believe as well, you might think, well, if we just have one against one elephant, the elephant's just going to run around it and carry on. It'll outmaneuver. We need big lines of these things to stop the elephants. And if the elephants try to go between them, they need to be close enough packed so that these swinging weapons can get within reach of them, hacking them as they go past. And then they'll be encountering as well the light troops that we'll station in between and or maybe slightly in front or behind, probably behind these carriages. So, yes, it is pushing it, but it's possible to believe that they did really make 300 of these. Now, the impetus for my coming up with this subject for this video is an article I saw published on the ever excellent Plastic Soldier Review website. It reviews the historical accuracy of plastic figures that are being produced in 1/72nd or 1/76th scale. So figures about this high. And the range of these is amazing now. I have no idea who's buying these figures. I don't think it's small kids, but I've never seen them used at a War Games event either. But now you can get all sorts of specialist troops from the ancient world. It's not just like in the days of Airfix, Romans, Britons, or was it Romans and Gauls, and that was it. No, you can get all sorts of companion cavalry and whatever you want. You're very likely to be able to get it these days. And so many things have been covered now that they're getting onto really obscure stuff, like these war wagons that were only used, so far as we know, in a single battle, the Battle of Asculum in 279 BC. Anyway, here we see the model as pictured on the site, and I looked at that and I thought, really? I had quite a few issues with that design. Now, other war game figure manufacturers have had a go at the same topic, and here's another one, for instance. And you notice here that it's being pulled, so the oxen are in front of it. There are four pulling it, but the oxen would be very vulnerable, wouldn't they, in front? And the men behind, swinging their even very long spears, would probably be out of reach of the elephants if you had two ox lengths in front of you to span. So I find that unconvincing. Surely you'd want the oxen behind, pushing. But there's a problem with pushing. Steering. How do you steer if you're pushing? Because if the wagon starts to go that way and the oxen are pushing that way, you just know it's going to go and everything's going to go horribly wrong. Now, if you've ever tried to push an old-fashioned pram, one of these, where you've got two fixed axles, there's no steering mechanism, you'll know that you have to really lift two of the wheels off the deck in order to steer. So if you're wheeling it along this way and you want to corner quickly, you'll push down on the handle, that'll lift up the two front wheels of the pram, and then you can move on the cart-like two wheels at the back, turning in a very sharp way and then off in a new direction. Or if you prefer and you want to steer a bit more gently and with the front end, you could lift and then steer with the front end and then put down, and then you're off again in a straight line. There is a really daft and persistent idea that in the medieval period, people lost the technology for steerable wagons. Like a lot of bad ideas, it's French. In 1872, a chap called Viollet-le-Duc first published this really quite daft idea. And he said, oh, no, they forgot it, because he didn't know of any mainstream French publication with evidence for steerable wagons in the medieval period. Therefore, there weren't any, was his conclusion. And other people started echoing this, and it appeared in more and more publications. Someone called, I've got it written down here, Lefebvre Desnuet. He decided that, oh no, it was about the 16th century that steerable wagons came back in. Now we know today that since at least the Hallstatt culture, a couple of millennia ago, in the Iron Age, they had steerable wagons. The Romans definitely had steerable wagons, and as late as 1956, someone called Gilles, I haven't got a first name for him, published the notion. Well, he came up with a seal from 1396 that clearly showed a steerable medieval wagon, and his conclusion was that, oh, that was when the steerable wagon was reinvented. Yeah, right. In the medieval period, they had clocks, they had working mechanical clocks, they invented spectacles and compasses and an awful lot of improvements with horse tack, with different collars for pulling things and different harnesses and better horseshoes and so forth. So why would they find a steerable wagon so difficult? But here, this for me is the clincher. We know for certain that in the medieval period they had wagons, and we know for certain that they had corners. And I'm just going to put these two facts together and say, yes, they had steerable wagons. Of course, they were able to go round corners. Now, a lot of people will say, oh, but look at this picture here of a medieval wagon, you see. How does that steer? You see, you've got just wheels, one behind the other. They look fixed. There's no steering mechanism shown. And look, you've got a single beam of wood that runs the whole length of the wagon, and then continuing out the front to where the various towing beasts are hitched to it. Yeah, look at the perspective in this picture, will you? Look at the front and the back. We're looking in to the wagon from the front and from the back. Is it curving away from us? No, it's hopelessly out of perspective. The person who drew this could not draw things accurately. Look at this wheel. Look how the wheel is depicted. You see that the axle is actually at the same height as that beam, not below it, where presumably it would have to be, unless it went through it, which would interrupt the beam, and so the beam would have no strength. That's got to be wrong. This has to be wrong. We see other pictures of medieval wagons where it looks far more like a steerable, believable modern wagon. And you'll notice that the front wheel and back wheel there are different sizes. Now, why are the wheels of wagons, as they so often are, different sizes? Well, perhaps you know, but again, there may be someone in the room who needs this explaining, and I'll do it for you. Well, you want the wheel to be as big as possible for a nice smooth ride. So imagine if you've got a stone this big and a wheel this big, it will roll over that stone and keep going, no bother at all. But a stone the same size and a much smaller wheel comes to it, it might it might fail to get over it at all, or it might have to go up and poof, and then on you go. You get a much more jolting, uncomfortable ride with small wheels. So you want to make the wheels as big as you can, but there are limits on how big you can make it. So if you want to be able to pick things up and load them into the back of the wagon reasonably easily, there's a certain height beyond which you don't want to go. You don't want to have to be lifting everything up there for the sake of a very large wheel. About this sort of height is normal for a wagon, and so you get wheels big but not staggeringly gargantuan. So that's why you want the wheels to be big. So why not make the ones at the front big as well? Well, you want the bottom of the body of the wagon, the bed, to be level, ideally. So you've got the big wheel at the back, but at the front you need the steering mechanism. So between the bottom of the wagon and the front axle, you need some sort of pivoting mechanism so that the front can actually turn, so the front wheels can steer. You see, you've got a pivoting mechanism at the front. Well, that means that it's going to have to be, the axle is going to have to be lower, and if the axle is lower, the wheel has to be smaller. But there's actually a second reason, because again, can you see in this, this picture, the advantage of a small front wheel is that your steering lock can be so much more steep. If you have very big back wheels, then they'll be blocked because they'll hit the sides of your wagon, whereas if they're much smaller, and you'll notice that quite often the wagons, the sides of the wagons go out like that to give more room for the front wheels to turn. So now you can turn quite a steep corner with your smaller front wheels. So there you go, that's why wagon wheels are different sizes front and back. And they were in the medieval period too. Medieval wagons, a wagon has 4 wheels, a cart has 2. Medieval wagons could steer. And if you've got a cart, of course, doesn't need a steering mechanism, because with 2 wheels you can just, you're fine. A bit like the pram going down onto 2 wheels, you can turn easily in a cart. But a wagon has a problem. Now there have been finds and pictures of ceremonial wagons that were put together to move religious icons and so forth, but the actual working day-to-day, trying to move large amount of goods across the countryside type ordinary wagons, they don't survive, and I'm pretty sure they could go around corners. So the Romans would have had a steerable wagon, and even though some reconstructions of these wagons show them with just 2 fixed axles, oh, and these big solid wheels, you see these big solid wheels, no, they had spoked wheels. They had an awful lot of people who could make spoked wheels, who made spoked wheels all the time, so they probably would have got them to make a load of wheels. Or they could have just taken a load of spoked wheels off pre-existing wagons, and so they could have got a load of spoked wheels very quickly, and spoked wheels are better, they are lighter, they are... they've got a little bit of flex to them. They are better. And they had them, so I'm pretty sure they would have used spoked wheels. What was I talking about before? The wheels, the frame. Oh, the frame on this, by the way, is also very, very thick, but that's partly a limitation of the model. With this plastic, you don't want the plastic too thin because it might bend or snap or whatever. But the frame at the back end, where the oxen are, seems to be unnecessarily hefty. Sticking out all that distance, it would be really heavy. But maybe I can give the model makers a pass on that one. So let's get back to this model. So I don't like the way the wicker is portrayed. At least it is shown as wicker. It's totally smooth on the inside, which is not very good for the person who has to paint the model, but also it just doesn't look realistic. Why would it be perfectly smooth on the inside? It's wicker. It's going to be bumpy and ragged and makeshift. And if anything, they tended to put leather on the outside of wicker. So if there were a smooth side, it probably would be the outside. And the wicker, it looks like it's been done on a computer. It's so geometrically perfect. I don't like it. And another thing I don't like is these little tiny crenellations, which to me don't look as though they'd work at all. They've only got 2 uprights. So if you weave a stick between 2 uprights, well, what's to stop it just falling out? Which is what is shown in this model. Now you could, I suppose, have just 2 uprights and bend a rod around in a figure of 8, and that can work, although that means that you can't use a very thick, strong rod because it'll just snap. Again, that's not what's shown in the model. So the wickerwork is not the greatest, but at least it's shown as wickerwork. Now, the thick frame, the artillery. So at the front, we've got 2 men manning an artillery piece. Now, the Romans did later develop artillery on carts, and an artillery piece, if they could get it on a wagon, that would, I would say that would be very effective against an elephant, very effective indeed. But I don't think they had them for several reasons. One, there's no mention of them in any of the sources. Now, surely, if they were shooting elephants with artillery from these wagons, that'd be one of the first things you'd mention, not all the detail about the fire and the grappling and the tow and the pitch and the scythes and all the rest. But they got a big piece of artillery. Another reason is that this sort of artillery, torsion-powered artillery, was the latest high-tech thing. It wasn't invented by the Romans, though. It was invented by the Greeks. And the Romans were only just encountering that stuff. So that's another reason that you would mention it. And it's also another reason that they wouldn't have it. They put together these wagons fairly quickly. I mean, we don't know exactly how quickly, but within months. And loads of people have tried to reconstruct torsion-powered artillery, and they've all found it extremely difficult. And making the ropes out of cow neck tendon sinews or hair or whatever is really difficult, and some of the process takes absolutely ages. And it is thought that perhaps some of these machines might have been built over a period of perhaps 2 years, and there was a very high weight. Modern attempts at reconstruction have had so many setbacks, so many failures, so many, this cracked because it was under such strain, we had to start again, and getting all the metal parts to work. They're difficult to make. So the idea that the Romans, against the Greeks, in this period, put together 300 of them quickly, it's just stretching credulity too much. So I just don't think that they had artillery in these wagons. But the sources do seem to agree reasonably that there were men shooting, but this model has one guy with a bow, and one guy definitely doesn't fit the term many in my book. So I think I would get rid of the artillery piece and have at least 2 more, and possibly more. There might have been 6 guys in the wagon, but more guys shooting arrows, throwing caltrops, slings, that sort of thing. I'm not sure I would use a sling from a weapon, from a wagon. A sling is not a great weapon to use when you're moving over bumps in the ground and you've got other people around you. If you circle that way, you're likely to hit someone, and you need a bit of room. I would have thought a bow, frankly, would work a lot better than a sling from a war wagon. But anyway, I'd have had more archers in there. Possibly men throwing javelins as well. More missile troops, but not artillery. So it seems that they weren't tall. Now, one reason for them not to be tall is that the taller it is, the more top-heavy it is, and the more likely it is to fall over. And I would have thought that even if it were reasonably short and squat, I would have thought a determined elephant could throw a pretty big wagon onto its side. So if an elephant got in there, I reckon it could tip one over. And so making life easy for it by having something very tall would not be a good idea. But we do have these vertical beams, but the vertical beam doesn't have to be very heavy. It doesn't have to be massive. It only has to bear the weight of a long horizontal spear, presumably much longer than a normal spear, with some sort of scythy, hitty-bashy, burny thing on the end of it. Now, sticking out in front of this, we have two beams with fire on the end of them sticking out in front. Yeah, I'm not convinced by that, not least because it really does not match the description, does it? Let's find it again. Bristling all directions, yeah. Oh, sorry, that's Cassius Dio. Sorry about this. Of course, it's always going to be the last piece. Yes. Upright beams on which were mounted movable transverse poles that could be swung around as quick as thought in any direction one might wish. And on the ends of the poles, they were either tridents or sword-like spikes or scythes, all of iron, or again they had cranes that hurled down heavy grappling irons. Many of these had poles attached to them, and projecting in front of the wagons, fire-bearing grapnels wrapped in tow that had been liberally daubed with pitch, which men standing on the wagons were to set afire as soon as they came near the elephants, and then rain blows with them upon the trunks and faces of the beasts. Well, how could you rain blows upon the faces of the trunks of the beasts with those two fixed beams sticking out the front? I think that you'd be relying on the elephant to come up and headbutt it, which is not going to happen. No, surely it's a grapple iron covered in tow and pitch burning on the end of a chain being swung around, and just fire being swung around you would hope would freak out the elephants and put them to flight. But then you could at least bash them, and you could, even if you didn't do them any harm, you'd have fire and the smell of it coming over their eyes, and they might not like that, and they might panic and run, all going well. So the beam sticking out the front, yeah, I don't buy that. Now you'll notice that there is no vertical beam on this. Whereas you'll notice that in this picture, which is on the front of the box, there's also no beam. But it's clearly based on this picture, which has a vertical beam, but the model makers presumably decided that that was too difficult, too much work, I don't know, left it off. So the inspiration for the model has been compromised somewhat. Yeah, the descriptions are quite clear. A vertical beam with something transverse. Now this guy in the vehicle with a sort of oar-like arrangement, that looks quite pathetic to me. He's got very little play with that. He certainly can't, at the speed of thought, swing it in any direction he might wish. He's on one side and he can do sort of that. There's a guy there, so he can't go forward very far, and he's pretty limited in what he can do going in that direction, so he can just sort of waggle it a bit. I don't think that's really going to worry the elephants too much. I'm much more convinced by a central vertical beam post with something pretty long, perhaps hanging on a chain, and so you've got a big swing either side, and then you could perhaps thrust with it a bit, and that would explain the trident idea. And if you had an awful lot of these wagons reasonably close together, the elephants would be quite running the gauntlet to try to go in between. And I think one of the reasons you might have light infantry escorting is not just for taking on the elephants, but also for taking on people who try to, on horses perhaps, ride round the back of you and then attack the men driving the oxen, who are probably pushing the wagons. So, how about this? Instead of building these weapons from scratch, perhaps they were able to put 300 of these together pretty quickly, because they just got 300 already existing wagons. These are just transport wagons that Rome would have had for moving all sorts of stuff. And all you've got to do is reverse the steering mechanism. So instead of having a pole going out in front and straps attached to that for animals to pull it and then turn from the front like that, you reverse it, have all that running underneath the wagon to the pushing animals at the back, but you've still got steerable front wheels, and you could have a sort of tiller. Now, if they had the tiller low, of course, you wouldn't have much left and right play, because you'd hit if you went too far that way, you'd hit the side of the wagon if it had wattling protecting the oxen, but before you got even there, you'd hit the oxen. So you'd have a very big turning circle. So perhaps the tiller would have to come out from under the wagon, then over the top of the oxen, and then perhaps down again for convenience, and you could have a tiller steering the front wheels like that. So you do that, and the wheels point that way, and then you go that way. You would still have quite a big turning circle, but at least you'd be able to go to the battlefield, down the roads, and then once on the battlefield, you'd be able to move in a big line slowly across the countryside with this tiller arrangement. What they've got in this model is a tiller attached to the yoke on the oxen. So the oxen are actually being turned, but I don't think that will work very well, because if they're pushing and this gets turned, turns that way, and they push, they just, then you go, oh no, hang on, we've got to stop, back everyone up, back, oh no, I don't think that would work very well. So I think the tiller would have to be not steering the oxen, but steering the front wheels. And I see no reason why wickerwork screens couldn't come over the top of the oxen, so that any missiles hurled down from the elephants or even just dropped onto the war wagons from ordinary infantry wouldn't take out the pushing beasts behind. So I think, yes, I think they would push, not pull. I think the oxen would be too vulnerable out front, and I think they would also make the reach of the swinging weapons just pathetic and futile. So you want to be able to swing around unmolested by any beast of burdens out in front of you. So you want beasts behind you pushing. It does mention in the sources oxen, and these are behind wicker screens of some sort, so says Dionysius of Halicarnassus, because the enemy had to hack through to get them. So you can imagine at least on the sides and the top of the oxen, you've got that. At the back, you'd probably have to have reasonably open so that the tiller can swing. Although I suppose you could have a slot for it, but then. Where would the men be? Would they be within the wicker themselves? Now, if the wicker is reasonably loose and you are fighting during the day, you could see a reasonable amount just through the wicker. You might not need to have windows exactly. So I can believe if you've got a man behind each wagon stationed with the light infantry shouting commands as well, you're going too far to the left or whatever, you could have the men actually in with the oxen, but of course that also means a greater amount of wicker protected volume, which means a greater weight of wicker, and the whole thing becomes heavier and more unwieldy. Talking of which, how wide would they have been? Well, the wider you make them, the more stable they are, and the more men you can get in them. And the more stable they are, the more you can swing with a bigger, heavier thing without rocking it too much, and more difficult it will be to overturn it by an elephant. So that's all good. Yeah, the trouble is that the wider it is, so many logistics problems. You've got to get to the battle. You've got to get it down a road. How wide are all the roads and lanes between wherever you are and where the battle is going to be? How many animals have you got to move these things? Where are you going to park them all? And the longer the axle, the easier it is for the axle to break in the middle. And a lot of wagons, they were very, very careful with their width for that reason. They wanted to be strong, so you wanted to minimize the length of the axle. So I suspect that they probably were standard wagon width. I suspect they were probably made out of standard wagons, to be honest. They were pushed, covered in wicker. They had burning pitch and tow. That's perfectly fine. And the Romans definitely had access to chains and things that wouldn't burn through. And so you could have a go at raining blows on the elephants. So, did they work then? No, not really. One of the pieces of evidence for that is the Romans never used them again. So if they were that great, I think they probably would have used them again. When Hannibal came over the Alps, they would have said, quick, 300 wagons. It worked brilliantly last time, but no one even mentioned it, it seems. And the success of them is not exactly stunning in these accounts, is it? In the last of the accounts I read out to you, it ended up a draw, and never do the wagons themselves are cut down and the men flee from them. So the wagons are mostly a failure. And you could imagine they were a huge drain of resources. So many men, so much of the logistics. Think you've got to move an extra 300 wagons. So that's an extra, 600 to 1,200 oxen that you've got to move and feed. And you've got to bring all the fodder for them or find grazing for all of them. You're introducing a massive logistics problem. There's a huge number of people invested, if they really had 300 of these, in just countering a small number of elephants. And the Romans came up with better ways of doing it later, changes of formation, better use of light troops. They did try caltrops again, so maybe the caltrops did help. They also tried flaming pigs and a few other ways, but the most successful methods were just using conventional troops, just retraining the troops to deal with elephants and not be too scared of them. And there were never that many elephants either. So there you go. That's my reaction to this model.